All right, so there really, to be fair, was not and still has not been a lot of finger-pointing over decisions made, now decisions that are in the past. George P. Bush, the Texas Land Commissioner, joining me right now. Commissioner, very good to have you back with us. What's the latest from your vantage point? How bad does this get? How far does this flooding spread?
Well, regretfully, Neil, the weather situation is not helping us. We're anticipating, as you had mentioned before, a few feet more of precipitation in many areas of our state. We have 54 counties of our 254 that are right now declared to be disaster areas. So we are still in the process of extensive search and rescue efforts. Pretty much the full weight of the state government, along with county and local leadership in these affected areas, are deploying as many assets as possible to the point of areas that need it the most, in addition to the extensive voluntary efforts that you and your viewers have been watching over the course of the last several days. And so that's the immediate priority right now, is saving as many lives as possible in an area where 8 million people are under some sort of flood advisory.
You know, what do you do for a lot of those people, particularly in areas now in Houston expecting feet more of rain? Is it almost too late to evacuate them, to wait it out? I mean, this could go on for 3 or 4 days. What do you do?
Well, the specific instructions have been to follow your local and your county emergency managers in terms of directions. A lot of that information has been put out on social media, TV, radio, any media channel that you can imagine. And the coordination has been seamless in terms of the directions that have been put out to the public. But for a lot of people that you're watching in Houston, yes, they are told to shelter in place, and a lot are going to be stranded in areas. You had talked previously with other elected officials that are stranded in their own areas. Our railroad commissioner, our lieutenant governor, for example, are stuck in their own neighborhoods in the greater Houston area. So I know local officials, according to the mayor's brief earlier today, and Chief Avocetto, the police chief in Houston, have said that they're trying to attend to the tens of thousands of 9/11 calls to the extent possible, but to not give up on local and county authorities to initiate search and rescue. You
know, a lot of people know your father, Jeb Bush, the former Florida governor, for how he handled hurricanes. He had some doozies under his watch, close to a dozen, for which he became very familiar. And he was famous for preparing residents to not take storms lightly or to go out afterwards in floods and risk their lives and their potential rescuers' lives. It's fair to say that a good many took this storm lightly, and maybe for good reason. They've seen threats or heard of threats before and maybe disregarded them. What do you think of all of that?
Well, this is a unique storm, Neil. You know, if you go back to Thursday, it was considered to be a tropical storm over the Yucatan Peninsula, so it wasn't really tracked by many, to be honest, and it developed into a Category 4 storm that immediately made landfall in South Texas, closer to Corpus Christi, Rockport, Port Aransas. What was very unique about this, Neil, is that it traveled over central Texas and just proceeded to create a rain-making type event that now, unfortunately, works against us because the state's geology flows downward. So you have 4 of our major rivers that are now out of their banks and creating a lot of stress in the Houston Bayou system. In fact, the Corps of Engineers just had to relieve some of that strain in the Buffalo Bayou, which runs right through downtown Houston. So it's a confluence of many factors that make this an extremely dangerous situation.
Commissioner, how do you think President Trump is doing so far with this? This is the first big weather crisis or emergency under his watch.
Well, he's doing the right things. He's accepted the governor's request for disaster relief. He'll be coming to Texas on Tuesday, and I think he's doing it in a thoughtful and methodical way, not to constrain our first responders that are currently activated and operating right now in the greater Houston area. I understand he's going down to the areas in which the storm hit initially, where landfall was made in Texas. And so I know, based upon the briefs that we've been getting at the State Operations Center, that the federal government has done their job. Right now it's going to come down to execution, but as you've seen, not only from amazing and heroic efforts from our first responders, but voluntary efforts. I mean, Texans helping Texans, people from all over the country coming into Texas to help out, even the Cajun Navy, as it's called.
It is just remarkable and very inspiring. You know, you mentioned the president, what he's been doing here. Sometimes presidents are damned if they do, damned if they don't. Your uncle, George W. Bush, for Katrina in New Orleans, I mean, he was originally criticized for coming late, and then others had warned him ahead of time, don't come too soon because you're just going to add to the, the dislocation going on. So maybe President Trump will be in that same kind of no-win conundrum. I mean, what do you make of that and how he has to handle that visit tomorrow?
Well, I'll leave that for the critics that will assess this. There's going to be plenty of time for that, and he probably will be criticized. It's always a no-win situation. But what he can do and has already done is pledged the available assets and resources. I know the federal government has done their part in pre-positioning assets to make sure that we mitigate a lot of the commodity shortages that we anticipate in the coastal areas, but also all available resources. I mean, the Coast Guard has really stepped up in terms of aerial reconnaissance and search and rescue missions that are taking place off of rooftops as we speak.
Commissioner, real quickly, one of the things I learned that makes Houston particularly vulnerable to what's going on right now is all the building that's been going on in that city. I've seen it for myself. It's all these cranes. It's been busy. 30,000 people added a year since, I guess, 2010. Too much so, making it an especially vulnerable city and lands that normally would have sort of sucked up the rain, unable to do so now?
Well, I think we need a paradigm shift here in Texas and, frankly, throughout the country in terms of how we mitigate future events like this, whether it's dealing with flood events or storm surge. Many anticipated this to be a storm surge event, but we're seeing that it's more of a rain-making event coming from the northwestern part of the state through the city. We can find that balance in our state we have between economic development on one hand and just living in a vulnerable area. New Orleans has rebuilt after Katrina. Their barrier system has been built to withstand a 20-foot storm surge. I know that after this process that as Texans will come together and do the same to make sure that we can stem events from this happening again.
All right, Commissioner, you've been busy, and we do appreciate the time you take to speak with us and update our audience, many of whom live in Texas. Thank you again, sir. Appreciate it.
You got it.